All right, we will call this February Student Achievement Committee meeting to order. Where we have some very exciting topics for us to dive into today. But before we get started with that, I have got to entertain a motion to approve our minutes from December.
I'll move adoption of or acceptance of the meeting minutes.
All right, motion by Chair Haggerty.
Second.
Second by Dr. Ng. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. And I will kick it off to Mr. Drew Cook.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And Mr. Swanson knows this, but for the group, Dr. Wilson Norman's not able to be with us this afternoon due to travel. And so in her place, I'm happy to provide a little bit of a context and overview of the two topics this afternoon. First of all, I will note, and you just approved the minutes, the revised agenda was just to correct the date on those minutes from December and not a previous date. So if you were wondering about the revision, that's the purpose. But in terms of context, the two topics that we're bringing this afternoon were really part of a planning list that Dr. Wilson Norman consulted, I know, with former committee chair Ms. Waters and also Mr. Swanson back last summer, and we've continued to get feedback and input from the board, and both of these topics were kind of on that long-range planning list, and we feel like certainly reflective of their critical importance to the operation, both current and future, of the district. So we always like to call out explicit connections to the strategic plan when we're doing these presentations, and so we'll note that both topics today on seclusion and restraint and also the McKinney-Vento program will hit on things like aims number 4 and number 8 around equity-focused practices, aims 8 and 9 on high-quality instructional core, and also aims 7 and 12 on family and community engagement. And so you'll hear those themes several times throughout both presentations today. So with that context and background in mind, at this time I'm going to turn it over to Jill and Jamal to take us into our first topic on seclusion and restraint.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you for having us with you this afternoon to talk about this very important topic. Before we begin the content for today, I want to just provide a little bit of context, of historical context around this. So prior to the pandemic, the district became aware of some concerns around our seclusion and restraint reporting systems, and at that time began to pull together a group to look at what we needed to do to improve our processes and our practices around that. That involved a multidisciplinary team of people from special education services, student due process, equity affairs, security, human resources, a variety of leaders, student support services, human resources, I think I said. They met numerous times, and really that first priority was to look at where was that disconnect between what was happening in the reporting systems and structures. Out of that, a new reporting system was constructed. That was first piloted in special education programs with a focus on our regionalized, specialized programs as students began to return to in-person learning in that 2020-2021 school year. And then it was released district-wide in August of 2021. So today's presentation is going to be the first of what will be semi-annual presentations to you all around the data for seclusion and restraint that we have in our district. So today we have a couple of different outcomes that we would like to see. We're going to spend a lot of time really on the first one to level set for future conversations. So we're going to be digging into the definitions of seclusion and restraint, which are a little bit different between state and federal. We're also going to look at when we need to report that, which again is a little bit different between state and federal. So we're going to spend a bulk of our time there. We're also going to tell you where we are with the current status of the work, and then look at the data. After we kind of go through where the data is for this first half of the year, then we'll wrap up with kind of what are some next steps around that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamal to talk through definitions of reporting.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate it. And again, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for your time and for your service to our district. We do appreciate it. And as a director of student due process, my role this afternoon is to provide you with the context and clearer understanding around the definitions of seclusion and restraint, and to help you develop a basic understanding of the subsequent data that will be shared throughout this presentation. And so on screen, you see a table where it's divided into federal definition and also a state definition. But before we jump into that, I do want to give you some background contextual information that we as a school district are bound to and guided by, which is General Statute 115C 390.1, Article 27, which speaks to student discipline in and of itself. And those guidelines include definitions and procedures on how to impose short-term suspensions, long-term suspensions, and an exhaustive list of other exclusionary practices. Also on this list in Article 27 is the definitions and understanding of seclusion and restraint. So it's not something that's been taken out of thin air. It is something that is by law required to be captured by a school district. And so within those definitions, you have language about permissible uses of seclusion and restraint. Just to give you the context, seclusion and restraint is not considered to be all bad, in as much as at times a student may be dysregulated, or an administrator may have to break up a fight, and they may have to restrain a student for safety or to transport them to another area. A student may be dysregulated in their classroom, and they may need to be temporarily timed out. So those are the permissible uses. And our federal definition is very broad, where they want to cast a wide net to capture all uses, whereas our state has a very narrow focus on specific permissible and impermissible uses, and that is what we report to you today. So we'll start with seclusion. And on the left-hand side, you see the federal definition, which is, word for word, the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or area for which the student is physically prevented from leaving. It does not include a timeout, which is a behavior management technique that is part of an approved program, involved the monitoring separation of a student in a non-locked setting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the wide net, the federal government wants to know clearly, anytime a student is prevented from leaving a space, schools and administration are required to report when that happens. On the state side, for seclusion, the confinement of a student alone in an enclosed space for which the student is physically prevented from leaving, again, by locking your hardware or other means, or not capable of leaving. That's the state definition, due to physical or intellectual incapacity. So the state's narrow focus of when we are required to report is any time a student is secluded exceeding 10 minutes or more, or out of the scope of their IEP plan or their 504 program plan. And these are considered impermissible, and they must be reported. Okay. Similar to having a very nuanced difference between seclusion, we also have nuanced differences in restraint. And we start off with the mechanical aspect of restraint. And so, again, federal definition is very broad and it casts a wide net, so they want to know all aspects at any time a student is mechanically restrained. And here it is, the definition: the use of any device or equipment to restrict the student's freedom of movement. The term does not include devices implemented by trained school personnel or utilized by students that have been prescribed by an appropriate medical or related service professional and are used for the specific and approved purposes, with such devices were designed. And so that would include young persons who may have disabilities which may require them to be seatbelted to a mechanical chair, or their wheelchair, or their device. That is perfectly okay. When are we supposed to report? Report the use of any mechanical restraint, including if a student is handcuffed by an SRO and no arrest is made. And this is specified in as much as due to the nature of law enforcement and what they do, they may act in the role of law enforcement at times and arrest a student if they see necessary. That is allowable, but the federal agencies want to know when a student has been handcuffed by the SRO and no arrest is made. And any other mechanical restraint, i.e. for a non-disabled student, potentially being taped to a chair, strapped down with zip ties or things of that nature. The state definition: the use of any device or material attached adjacent to the student's body that restricts freedom or movement, or normal access to any portion of the student's body that the student cannot easily remove. So in this case, the state wants to know very narrowly any mechanical restraints that involves the taping, tying, or strapping down of the student that's considered impermissible, and we must report that. And here we have physical restraint, the definitions of what they are and when we report. So again, the federal, casting a wide net. A personal restriction that immobilizes or reduces the ability of a student to move his or her torso, arms, legs, or head freely. The term physical restraint does not include a physical escort. So if there is a situation in our K-12 setting where two young people get into fisticuffs and adults have to hold them back, the federal government considers that to be a physical restraint. However, the federal wants to make certain that we do not include physical escorts where a young person may have to be escorted safely across a parking lot during carpool, or safely from one class to another with a one-on-one personnel or by administrator, or somewhere else to where they are kept away for safety. Okay? But again, federal wants us to report anytime we have not including physical escorts. The state would like for us to report the use of physical force to restrict the free movement of a portion of a student's body. That's the state definition. And we are to report when any physical restraint results in an observable physical injury. So the state is very, very narrow, and they want to know only when a young person is hurt after the fact as a result of a physical restraint, not at the fact that they had to break up a fight or that they had to escort another student to another classroom and things of that nature, but only when physical injury is present. Okay. The last definition that is part of Article 27 are aversive procedures. We are putting that out there because it falls underneath the seclusion and restraint definitions. I do want to say, first and foremost, it is incredibly illegal to perform aversive procedures, and we do not have any aversive procedures to report. But in case you ever hear it come across the table, the definition is here: a systematic of physical or sensory intervention that is used to modify behavior or a student with disabilities. And the federal would like to know when that occurs. Also, the state would like to know any intervention that results in physical harm or psychological impairment. Again, we make it very clear through our training, through our focused work, to make certain that folks are aware that aversive procedures are illegal, and we do not have those. So I want to make sure we emphasize that.
The other piece that we want to share with you before we move into the data is around our what's referred to as CPI training. This is something that we partner with the Crisis Prevention Institute, which is what CPI stands for, to deliver nonviolent crisis intervention training. We currently have 34 employees who have completed the Train the Trainer framework and conduct ongoing trainings throughout the year for our staff here. Each school has a team of trained CPI staff so that we have people on hand when we do need to intervene. The focus of this model is really on that the prevention and de-escalation skills. So it involves coursework that the staff will complete prior to attending the training in person that is focused on verbal de-escalation skills. How do we intervene at the lower level in an effort to not need to use physical restraint? They learn kind of the various stages of crises and then how to respond at each of those stages. They also learn that one day of kind of in-person piece is focused around what are the safe and appropriate ways to physically restrain if it becomes absolutely necessary to do so for student and for staff safety. A critical portion of this training actually focuses on what we call post-vention strategies, which is how are we building that therapeutic rapport back with the student, following a restraint, what are we doing to ensure that the student has kind of a transition back in, we're building that relationship up again, and then what are we doing to really problem solve to try to get ahead of something like this happening again. Through this training, staff are really given a space to think through objectively how can we plan for responding to some of those high-risk behaviors rather than be in a space of trying to respond in the moment. So it gives them that space to think through ahead of time. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've been engaging in this work for several years now to look at our reporting practices. So I want to talk a little bit about the current status of this work. This is very cyclical work, right? So We have really taken some strides to how can we have more accurate and clear reporting systems in place. The major components of this you'll see are around the training, what are we doing with reporting, we have review processes, and then we have the reporting piece that goes to DPI. Every employee who works with students is required annually to view the seclusion and restraint training, both the site that we maintain as well as the video, and to read our board policy. We have board policy 4302 and an accompanying RMP document. All of that is part of the beginning of year requirements for any staff working with students. This year, that online training, which is a legal training, was updated in collaboration with Tharrington Smith to include very specific terminology, examples, hypothetical situations. In addition to that legal training, staff are also required to view a video that walks them through the reporting process and the reporting document. The legal training kind of focuses on those legal aspects of when to report. The training on the form clearly articulates at multiple points throughout that staff must report any incident of seclusion and restraint using this form, as well as notifying the parent or guardian. Based on the data that we're going to share today, we are confident the updated trainings have moved us closer to more accurate reporting of seclusion and restraint. After the incidents are reported, we do have a review process that's been established. Incidents are reviewed daily by a member of the student due process team. We have a new position that has been allocated to this. So that team member reviews any incidents that have been reported for that day, as well as work closely with other members of student due process to look at things like suspension notices where there may be mention of a seclusion or restraint incident that did not get reported through the form, and then does follow up with the schools as necessary. In addition to looking at that kind of alignment piece between the definitions for both state and federal and when we need to report each of those. We do have a monthly kind of cross-departmental PLC meeting that involves members of student due process and members of special education services, where we're reviewing the data, we're resolving any discrepancies, and we're starting to problem solve. What we're seeing both from a reporting aspect as well as what we could do to look at further training and supports that would help reduce the need for seclusion and restraint. The problem-solving efforts for this year have really been focused around accurate reporting processes and then those potential areas for additional training needs. This year, this review process has already led us to some refinements of the form for the second semester of this school year. So we're always looking at how we can continuously improve upon this process. These combined efforts have improved our reporting practices so that we are coding and reporting to DPI within that 5-day timeline of an incident being reported. All right, so Jamal is going to share data for the first half of the year.
Absolutely, thank you again. And so in front of you, you'll see a pie chart that also has been exploded out with this section of the number of students that have been involved in incidences or occurrences of seclusion and restraint. So Wake County Public Schools total enrollment is 15,995 students. We've had 240 unique students who have been subject to seclusion and restraint per the review of the document from the start of the school year in July through the December 2023 timeframe. And the breakout of that slice of the pie are divided into elementary, middle, and high school, where at the elementary level there's 180 students, unique students that have been subject to seclusion and restraint, 28 students at the high school level, and 32 students at the middle school level. I also do have, just to give you context of these numbers, This is actually 0.2% of our overall ADM, so it is a very, very, very small problem or occurrence compared to the overall number of students. Next slide.
Before you go, I just wanted to clarify, that's 159,000, not 15,000.
Sorry, 159,000, excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I caught it. I was just like,
Pardon me. Glasses. Pardon me. All right. So the next chart we have here, bar graph, is the disaggregated data by demographics. Now, this number that you see on these charts are actual student count numbers, not percentage numbers. And so all told, there were 86 students who are white students, which is 36.5% of the 240 unique students. We had 9 students who were multiracial in total, which is 3.8% of 240 unique students. Our Hispanic population, 28 students subject to seclusion and restraint, which is 11.7% of 240 unique students. 106 Black or African American students, which is 44% of 240 unique students, and 11 Asian students, which is 4.6% of our unique student counts of 240. And so we also did divide it out in terms of students with disabilities, with IEPs, 504s, and students without. And it is more of a typical occurrence where our students with disabilities become dysregulated, where the need for either seclusion to re-regulate or to escort them elsewhere is needed in order for safety of self or safety of others, hence giving us our count.
The other piece that I want to point out on this too is our training efforts around this and our rollout around this started with our specialized programs. So the processes and the reporting features are also very much on the radar of teachers of students with IEPs at this point. So we do recognize that there is a need for some further training and communication around reporting for students without IEPs, but that also accounts for some of that difference that we're seeing here as well.
Absolutely, and to further that, Jill addressed the gaps of the team that is responsible for looking through the daily spreadsheet. They do reach out to the schools anytime a notice of suspension comes across that has language of seclusion and restraint to make certain that they cross-reference that incident from the suspension to the reporting tool. And in many cases, we have caught a number of non-special ed students within that count because of that intentional work. Okay? And the last table here are the overall count of reportable acts of seclusion and restraint that has occurred across the entire district. Making up the 240 students, we have a total of 864 instances of seclusion and restraint, whereas you see in the chart the breakdown of each type, whether it be federal seclusion, state seclusion, federal restraint physical, or federal restraint mechanical, state restraint seclusion, state restraint physical, or state restraint mechanical. And there are your counts, as we have seen, as the language describes within the incident narratives or information that we have gathered from our collection tool, and we have identified it to be each one of those respectively.
So I want to close our presentation by going back to the ongoing work cycle. We are committed to clear and accurate reporting and improving our systems to support the reduction of seclusion and restraint incidents. So to that end, we've identified a need for additional messaging around the reporting of seclusion and restraint, specifically as it relates to students without IEPs. There's things like breaking up fights, right? So those are some things that we need to do some additional messaging and training around. We are exploring processes that would also allow principals to be able to access the individual school level data around this. Right now, the data is accessible at the district level. We're able to provide that to individual schools on principal request, but we're exploring processes that would allow them to be able to have access to that kind of real-time overview data as well. And we are beginning to formulate those ideas for additional future training, not just focused around the reporting pieces, but also what are those training needs so that we are reducing the incidence of seclusion and restraint within our school system as well. So with that, we will open it up for questions and dialogue.
Sure. Well, thank you all for walking through this, and I'm sure I have many questions. I'm sure my colleagues does as well. Chair Hager?
Well, I was actually going to defer because I probably know, looking around the table, probably maybe the least about some of these issues. But if I can, I guess I have like a background question and then maybe a legal question. I've never heard of aversive techniques before. It's just not in my experience. And I'm just trying to get a little more sense of an understanding about what that is. It said physical or sensory intervention used to modify behaviors, but it was making it sound like this was a very negative thing. And so, when I first heard that phrase, I was thinking about things like timeout rooms, meditation rooms with like maybe lower light or soothing music. That's not what you're talking about.
No.
Okay.
No. So that is that clip of the definition doesn't fully capture what that is. So aversive techniques, aversive procedures are those things that you would look at as a very egregious act or method that we would use, right? So submersing a child in water.
Okay.
Things that would make you cringe, right? So that is why we say it is illegal. It is strictly prohibited in Wade County Public School System.
Okay. Just that snippet seemed very broad, and I didn't know.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. When you dive a little bit further into kind of more of the specifics of the definitions and the reporting documents,
Dr. Ian?
I do have, thank you so much for the presentation. I was thinking, is this something like a negative reinforcement kind of a technique or which would, potentially is not helpful overall. But the question I have for this presentation is, what do you do in a student-specific approach for helping with the preventing the incidents, of needing to have seclusion or restraints? I mean, do you actually talk about it amongst staff members and then immediately implement that? How do you go about doing that?
So what we do is going to be very student-specific, individualized to their needs. So a lot of that is discussions. For students with IEPs, it would be discussions in the IEP meeting around what that looks like, strategies to intervene. A good portion of that is what are we looking at for specially designed instruction for this student to help teach them replacement behaviors or appropriate coping strategies. But then also having those conversations afterwards with the staff. Part of this reporting process, one of the things that we require in the reporting process is what are those post-vention strategies and what is that follow-up going to be? So not just the post-vention strategies with the student, but are you going to follow up by having a consultation with a behavior specialist, with a behavior coach, with a coordinating teacher? You're going to have an IEP meeting to look at the behavior intervention plan. So at each incident, really thinking through what are those next steps so that we can come together and talk about that individual student and what we need to maybe do differently or put some additional supports in place.
Thank you. A different question, and it's more probably a technical question, but in terms of if a student is needing therapy, physical therapy during the course of the day, is that, from my experience with, in physical therapy, that some of them do require some kind of, taping or some kind of format where they try to keep that arm from so that they encourage the other side to use the other side with things like that. I mean, is that kind of separate from what we're talking about here?
It is separate from what we're talking about in here. So those types of interventions, or sometimes they're devices, like a wheelchair or a special chair that a student might need, are absolutely required. They are technically forms of restraint, but they are carved out of what we're talking about today, with the exception that was in the definition around the being prescribed by medical or related service personnel, as long as it is being used in accordance with how it's supposed to be used, and with the student who it's supposed to be used with. So if I have a specialized chair for Jamal because he needs that, but I use it for Drew instead, I would need to report that as impermissible because it is not part of Drew's plan. We do not have any incidents here where that is reported or occurring to our knowledge. What we're talking about today is more in the realm of breaking up fights, dysregulation, safety, security sort of concerns.
Thank you.
With the data that you have, just looking at that chart, you did mention that you were working a little bit further on the reporting. Will they break that down so that we can understand where the general, trying to think of what I'm trying to say here, like, is it more of a classroom disturbance, or is it when the children are out in general, say lunch or recess, or so that we have a better understanding of when these happen?
Location?
Yeah.
We do not currently collect data based on the location where it has happened. We do know, so the reporting form includes time of day, of course, the date of the incident, time of day, length of time, so that we're able to look at for the individual child how we might need to problem solve around that if we're seeing kind of this particular period of the day.
Right.
Seems to be a time that we need to problem solve around. Occasionally there will be some, in the narrative piece to describe the incident, there may be something there that would indicate location, but overall that's not been something that we have collected to be able to report out. But that is something that we would be having those conversations as follow-up with the problem-solving piece for the individual student.
Okay. The reason I ask is because I know that sometimes when they're in a situation that's not as structured, it can be more challenging for some students. So I'm wondering if we need more training there, because my second part of that question was going to be, when we talk about the training part of it, and you did mention like sensory and IEP needs, do all of our teachers receive some kind of training with that? Because if they are in recess, they may not necessarily be with the person who's assigned to help them with their needs. Do all of our teachers have some kind of training on what this looks like to at least understand it?
So in terms of what we provide for professional learning, we do have professional learning options that are available to all teachers, instructional assistants. They're not all required to do that, but that is something that we certainly can explore further.
I think with the, just, comparing back with a decade or even 2 decades ago, with the amount of special needs that we have with children with 504 and IEPs, I just feel it's escalated. So it might really be valuable for our teachers to all at least have a bare minimum of training. So that, because at one point or another, they're going to be around children that something may escalate, and it happens quickly, right? So if they have some kind of training,
Yeah. Thank you.
My question definitely was along that line. And Ms. Rice, I'll get to you in a second, if that's okay. Since this does relate back to our strategic plan and the aims and goals that was lifted, for me, I think it would be mandatory for teachers to go to participate in these trainings, especially, our special education teachers not having one or two that were required. And if that teacher is out and something happens, and you don't have a principal that's trained, having additional bodies additional folks that are trained, that have went through this training, could definitely help de-escalate a lot of situations, because oftentimes adults are just as can cause some of these behaviors or trigger some of these behaviors for our students. That's the appropriate word I was trying to look for. So as we take things back, that would be something I hope that we could really flesh out, especially since it correlates with our strategic plan. Ms. Rice?
Well, it looks like you guys, we're all on the same page, because that's definitely some things that I wanted to ask. How are we collecting the data when they're writing the report? One of the things I think that's important is what was happening prior to, right?
And that is part of what we collect. So the reporting form, in addition to the incident and a description of that, also has a section for antecedents, so that we're looking at what was happening right before that. Again, it goes back to how are we problem solving for the student, and without that antecedent information, it's really difficult to problem solve.
Right, and then the other part for me is with our students with IEPs that I saw here, that was the students with IEPs with the most restraints, right? How are we identifying when that measure is needed? What measure are we using to identify when we think that is the next level that needs to happen to restrain our children, and particularly since we're using our strategic plan, what equity lens are we using that we're seeing our BIPOC students at a higher rate than other students with that? And then how well are our teachers in that situation? Are they actually, I know we're assuming that because these students have IEPs, we're assuming that they're in a special education classroom, but that's not where it is. So we're looking at our students in a regular education classroom. How trained are our teachers, and how often are they familiarizing themselves with this student's IEP and making sure they know these students' triggers? I heard someone say that prior to engagement in that class. I don't know what we might need to do around that professional development level for them because in fairness, it's a lot of students, but what are they using as measures to help themselves, right? To remind them what students are getting ready to come in their class next period, that they need to be mindful, have an IEP or Section 504 that can trigger their hippocampus to remember certain strategies that they must be doing to make sure that that student doesn't escalate to this, right? Because they're not, it's a lot. And I want to be fair with our staff. It's a lot to remember, and especially if we don't even know, we saw here with elementary. So with elementary, with our students as 180 people, it's a lot going on in elementary and hands-on things. So I'm trying to keep it specific. I hope I'm making sense in what I'm saying and asking those type questions. But what's most important to me is how are we identifying when we need to use these restraints? What measures do teachers have to say, oh, I need to use a restraint at this point in time? And then what lens are they looking through to determine that they need to use the restraint?
Right, and that is one of those components of the CPI training piece of that, where they have that kind of, there's a decision-making matrix to help think through what does that look like and where does the behavior become high risk that it should, that you may need to consider a restraint, and where is it not as high of a risk and we should not be considering using restraint, and making those decisions and kind of thinking through that ahead of time rather than that in the moment sort of decision.
Of these students, 240 students, in those classrooms, how many of those direct teachers are CPI trained?
I will need to get the exact number on teachers. Staff in our elementary behavior support programs where we tend to see more of the dysregulation, and we do require staff in there to have CPI training, at least through the verbal de-escalation piece. The other piece, there is staff in the classroom who is trained on the physical restraint portion. The reason that it may not be everybody in that class is there may be some physical reasons for the adult that they are not able to do that portion of it. They are also required to go through a retraining refresher of that on a regular basis, so it is not a one and done training for staff in that classroom. We do have additional staff in buildings that are trained beyond even just special education teachers. Each school has their own team, and the makeup of that team looks a little bit different. But the classrooms where we tend to see students who are more dysregulated, it is a requirement for staff in that classroom.
Can I just make sure that I hear what you're saying with my question? I just trying to make sure I'm hearing it right. So you're saying that every classroom has a trained person in CPI for every one of these students that are receiving IV, or that they're coming in contact with this?
So maybe not for every one of the students in this 240 in the classroom, because they are not all in specialized programs.
So it goes back to what Ms. Cofield was saying, is that we look like there's mandatory training, because if they're in regular education classroom as well as special education classroom, how can we expect our staff to support students with IEPs if they're not trained? It's not, to me, it doesn't seem fair. I can speak from my own knowledge of having a child with an IEP or a Section 504. Some of the challenges, and then we don't know with this if it's behavioral, intellectual, or is it other health impaired. We don't know what that looks like. And students have various health challenges that spoke to what we were saying. How do we do that? So what I would really love to see is across the board is for the protection of our students and for the protection of our staff, they should be empowered with knowing how to best handle our students so that everyone remains safe, and to decrease these numbers, because we now understand our IEP. They have some measures in place to know what students get ready to come in my class next, that I need to be mindful, have little notes or something to themselves. And then the other part for me with the restraint, is it with the teacher or is it with the sub? So these are some factors to me that may have to take place in answering later or something, but how do we help our subs, even without sharing private information, to make sure that students are always in a safe space in a learning in a classroom and getting what they need in transition? I think I'll stop right there. I'm sorry.
Ms. Caulfield and then Dr. Ng.
So I know on this chart where we see 180 elementary school kids, and I understand that that doesn't mean that our elementary schools are more challenging and difficult. However, they are, right? Because as children in elementary school in general, they are frontal lobes not developed. They're still developing their skills on how to behave socially without the challenges of 504 and IEP. So I do understand why there's more of a concentration in that number there. And I think with them in general, just learning how to behave and how to get their day, learning how to understand their body, that's why we see a little bit more difference in the middle school and high school. but still in middle school and high school now they're transitioning a lot, and that tends to be a very big thing for children that have, you know, special needs. Transitioning is quite challenging. So at first I was thinking, well, maybe we need more PD in the elementary school area, and then I was thinking, well, when they get older, no, they're going to have different challenges, and they may not need to understand, but the anxiety and pressure is going to build so much more, so we might have bigger challenges, just less frequent, if that makes sense. So I think, if I understood what you were saying, is just understanding the numbers more is what I was saying in a different way.
Yeah.
But if we understand the numbers more of where, then we know where to put our efforts.
Right.
And I'm sure that you guys dissect this like 100 different ways as you're deep in it, right? But for us to understand where we can support you more, just having that more in the chart, breaking the numbers down a little bit more might help, you know, figure that out. But I think we all kind of are saying the same thing.
Can we say how often, too, with the occurrences? Because we've got a number of 240, but we had 864 restraints, right? Looking at the occurrences happening within the group of just 240 students and how often it's happening, and then the type of restraint, of understanding what we might need to look at how to support. I may not be saying that right, Chris, at the translate.
I got to pull up the slides.
Right, he's on the slide about it.
Well,
Yeah, how does it work out with 800?
you see,
So you had 864
Right.
active seclusion, but only 240 in the chart.
absolutely, which means it's constant, some repetitive stuff that's happening with the same students, and we need to determine what does that look like. That's why I was saying we need to know what's happening before the incidents, and you said we have that data, and then we really need to look at which students, which maybe just, I can say this, which disorders or which is happening with students most often that's occurring with the restraints.
And with IEPs, and also I think to kind of keep in mind, looking at this data, issues that happen prior to and what happened, you know, prior to kids coming to school also affects their day-to-day operations.
Absolutely.
And so I think we have to keep in mind that whole, you know, what happens outside the classroom or outside the communities also affects our students. And a question that I have that was, that kind of arrives through here is, you know, is our SROs involved in this training? Do they participate in this training, or do they have a different training?
SROs have their own trainings that they do and their own processes and procedures that are in place. They're not involved in this particular training. I do know that they've got like crisis type of training and things like that they also participate in as well. The only kind of piece around the SRO that we're required to report around this is handcuff where no arrest has been made. But that is within kind of their legal bounds of what they can do as a law enforcement officer.
Because typically if you hear someone say seclusion or restraints, you may think of our law enforcement, so just wanted to flesh that out a little bit more. Dr. Dean?
Yeah, so I've been thinking through what everybody's been mentioning, and you know, it's always difficult when you're right in the middle of it, right? And I really feel like the personnel who know that student best is going to have the best approach. You know, the familiar face will make the most impact in terms of de-escalation versus somebody who just swoops in, who that student does not know, and trying to de-escalate. So definitely having the that relationship with the teacher and the student plays a big part in success for de-escalation. And then in terms of the training, you know, it's a balance. I mean, I want all of our teachers to have that familiarity of how to do some of the basics. And I trust that, you know, that the experts on how to do this, you have them in each school as a kind of a backup, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of that's how it works in the hospital. You know? that you know, all the nurses know how to work on de-escalation, but when it comes to the point of of actually, if it gets beyond that point, then another person has to come in and help. So I trust you guys have kind of thought through the process, but I do support what everybody's saying. I think because all our students are going to be in the general classroom as well as the special ed classroom, that I think all the teachers should have some kind of familiarity on the techniques.
If I can ask a question around students and the incidents, and what are you seeing, or what are you hearing around the family engagement piece of the constant recurrences within the classroom, and how are families being engaged to support teachers, right? And sharing what are best practices that work at home to keep de-escalation down, so that it also translates into school, and then school sharing what they found with the student of best practices, so that parents can also translate that at home. So it's what are we looking at around partnership with home and school and bridging the gaps of communication, so that we can help decrease the restraints that our students are facing and work in partnership with school and families.
Can I answer that? That was my only question, listening to y'all all the way here. So the only other addition that I had to that is also when our students are transitioning from schools, I mean, it's a constant conversation that you're not going to be surprised that I'm bringing up, is that when we move schools for these students who need our supports, we know that that's a disruption for them. And so that would be the other piece is, including the family, but also what does it look like sharing that information when we have to disrupt a student to send them to another school? Are the things that worked also being shared across schools? That was my only addition.
I just want to make sure, too, what we're not losing here is that seclusion is also for keeping our kids safe as well. And this number may seem very high, but it's also we're keeping kids safe that are reacting, and the students that are in the classroom as well. And so that's something I think we have to be very intentional of and keep in the forefront of our heads, is because our students are young. They're going through all different types of things, and at the end of the day, they're still students. And we have to ensure that, number one, not only is their education important, but their safety inside of our buildings are important as well. Mr. Haggard?
Thank you. To shift the topic, but I want to go back to these definitions and the whole reporting process if we could. So early in the presentation, I had a question that I think was answered, but then it led to some other questions. Do the different definitions, both of the federal and state definitions, result in differences in reporting?
That's good.
Yes.
And so it sounds like they do, based on what we've seen. And so are the different definitions that are used required specifically by each jurisdiction?
Yes.
So that you couldn't take the state definition and then just use that for your federal and your state reporting and vice versa?
Correct.
You have to use the definition as they define it.
Correct.
Okay. So then when I look at reportable acts of seclusion and restraint on that slide 11, I see it totals up to 864.
Yes.
But then some of those say, for example, federal physical restraint. So I think those would be incidents under that definition.
Yes.
616. If we look at those under the state physical restraint definition, that's 6.
Correct.
Significantly less.
Correct.
But then what I wonder is, are those 6 incidents also included in that 616?
Yes.
So then we don't actually have 864 incidents, do we? Because you have some double counting.
That is correct. Those would be embedded within that. So this is just what we're reporting total number-wise. It might, to that point, be better if we, in future presentations, remove that total, because that is...
Good point.
Or break
That
down
is
which
very
ones
good.
were repeated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just because if
Yes.
some are included within another one, it seems to like falsely inflate
Yes.
those numbers. And so, if it's important to know the distinction between federal and state, I think we need to report back to us, not just to the government, but, tell us both, but just give us the context of what they are.
David's Mr. Hyde, we need to dig deep.
That is great feedback, because that federal definition is broader, so your state are going to be captured within that. It's just a smaller subset of what's there.
But just making sure we can't use just one set.
Right.
We have to use two different
Correct.
sets. Okay.
Correct.
I had sensitive, I just couldn't get
Some of
it.
that.
Yeah, I was,
Yes, Ms. Coughlin?
Do we use weights or any kind of weighted things to de-escalate our children?
Yes, if it is part of their IEP or 504 plan, we do.
So they have to get that, I guess when they meet with the parents, they decide that these are the devices and techniques that we use? and
Correct. That falls under that kind of prescribed by the related service provider when we're talking about like a weighted blanket or a weighted vest. Just to clarify what we mean by weights. A weighted blanket, a weighted vest. We've got like for our younger kiddos, like weighted kind of animals. They look like stuffed animals
Right,
that have a little
yeah.
weight to them.
Yeah.
And that's part of their prescribed plan.
Scarves, all those things, yeah.
And it's been somewhat referenced a little bit. Can you kind of just dig a little bit deeper of, the BST, Behavior Support Teachers, and how they fall? And for those who are not familiar with SPED, just kind of how that plays into some of this as well.
Sure. So we have several different programs that are designed for students who have social behavioral needs. At the secondary level at middle school and high school, there are VST and AST programs, behavior support teachers, autism support teachers. At the elementary, we refer to them as our EBS programs, which is our elementary behavior support programs. Oftentimes, we will see students who are participating in that program have more frequent dysregulation. The teachers and staff in that program are trained as special education teachers. IAs are assigned to that program, and they are extremely familiar with the students' IEPs, BIPs. Some of our students have crisis plans. They'd be familiar with any of that and be implementing those pieces. When it comes to the kind of secondary level, because students are out transitioning more, our AST and BSTs also become kind of that safe place if a student is feeling kind of overwhelmed or dysregulated in a larger classroom. They have access to, like, I need to go take a break with Mr. Woods for a little bit and kind of get it together. So they have that kind of safe landing space to go through, decompress, kind of get things kind of back on track, process through what might be going on, implement those strategies, and then go back and access their regular classroom. And we do have at the elementary level, as our students are transitioning out of those elementary behavior support programs, very similar sort of structures in place as well.
Thank you, because I feel like that was some of the pieces that Ms. Rice was mentioning earlier, and I just wanted to circle back to it and not feel as if we were ignoring those pieces.
And I appreciate that because I didn't have that background.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you. Well, if there's no more questions, Ms. Coughlin?
One more
Yes.
question, sorry, filled with questions like this. How many of our schools have what I like to refer to as Zen dens? The de-escalation place for them to go to? Not necessarily that we restrain them, put in ISS, it kind of feels like they're in trouble. Sometimes they don't de-escalate.
I don't know that number right off the top of my head. So that piece is different than what we're talking about here
Okay.
today, right? So seclusion is a kind of separate enclosed area free of all of that. We do have in many classrooms, and this is not even just specific to special education, many teachers have an area of the classroom that it is like, here's my calming corner. If you need a break, go,
Right.
take a break there. There's usually like some sensory fidgets, those sorts of things. Not a separate area, not used because a student is exhibiting kind of that high risk sort of behavior, but just, I'm dysregulated, I need a moment, let me go employ this intervention. certainly monitored during that time, but not prevented from leaving, not an enclosed space, none of that. But that it is actually a pretty common practice in classrooms across the district to have a separate area that students are able to access as a lower level intervention.
Right. I was just wondering the connection between, this seems more like this is what happened because it got too far and we needed that intervention versus where we start off there. Does that make sense, my question?
Yes, and of course, we would want to get to a point where we're moving to students responding to that lower level, go to the calming area of the classroom, not leave the classroom, not
Right.
continue to kind of escalate. Our goal is for those lower level interventions to be successful, so that not only are we reducing seclusion and restraint, but we also have students who are then able to come back and access and participate in instruction at a much quicker time frame.
And learn.
Exactly.
Right, better
Yeah.
options.
Well, thank you all so much for some great dialogue on this, and I'm sure we will bring special education back to student achievement. I know it's been a topic earlier, but it seems like there's still a lot of questions about this. So, Ms. McKenna, I'm sure we will see you again soon.
Thank you.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.
So our next topic is McKinney-Vento. Sure. While we wait for the slides to
You
transition.
folks coming in?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in the boardroom, so they're.
Yeah, Cheryl, what'll fool you sometimes is with Mr. Woods, he'll usually just pop up with a blank screen, so we don't often see his face.
Yes, and so I was thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, and then when you said that,
Well, actually, we do have room there. There's a attorney or I don't know who wants to.
He works for you.
yes, and I was thinking of Dr. Walker, I was thinking Dr. Walker's name.
Oh, so you're right there, okay.
You're right, his name is often
Ms. Woodson, will you be driving this presentation?
I'm going to be starting the
Okay.
presentation for sure. I have amazing people with me that are going to help support that conversation. Good afternoon. Welcome again to our conversation a little bit further today about McKinney-Vento programming. And this is a specific program that we certainly allow and facilitate our supports for specific groups of students here, and we want to make sure that we give you a great overview of what that looks like. So I want to introduce you to Michael Pesch, who is our Director of School Social Work, and he is our supporter of this McKinney-Vento program, and Michelle Mazingo, who is our District McKinney-Vento Liaison, and they are going to drive the majority of the program. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pesch.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us here today for this. So today we're going to do, part of this presentation is an overview of the McKinney-Vento law. Just always good, since we don't get to come here frequently and talk about this, it's good to just give you that quick overview of the program. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we're serving our students in this district, talking about the progress we're making, and also about some of the challenges and ways that we're working to overcome those challenges. So to do that, we're going to have Michelle Mazingo, our district liaison for McKinney-Vento, present to you today. So I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Today, we are looking at some desired outcomes of understanding the McKinney-Vento program, the rights and services that are provided, the population that we serve, and what the needs are of our students. And we can connect this program and our services and our rights to the strategic plan through the goals and aims listed here, Priority 1 and Priority 2. So getting into the meat of it, the McKinney-Vento program is actually federal law. It's the McKinney-Vento Act. Sure. And it protects the education of children and youth who've been displaced, or you may have heard children and youth who've experienced homelessness or experiencing homelessness. And what the program does, the law provides rights and services to those students, and this program implements those rights and services for the district. And the program is in all charter schools and all public schools throughout the United States. So if we do have families in our program who move on to another county or another state, these rights and services follow them. And so our real goal here in the program is to keep kids as school stable as we can, because research shows that they do better in the long run, socially, emotionally, physically, academically, if they stay school stable. We also remove barriers to student success. So as you can imagine, our families who are experiencing homelessness do have quite a number of barriers. So if we can keep our kids school stable, in school, and graduate, even if they get a GED, but we want them to graduate, they are 4.5 times more likely, if they do not graduate, to experience this displacement, this homelessness as an adult. So what we're doing isn't just within the schools and within the family, but we are touching on the impact that it has on society as a whole. So kids that we are looking for in this program, we are looking for families who do not have, a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so what this looks like, it looks like families who are living with other families because of a hardship like an eviction, or families who are living in hotels because they had a house fire or they were kicked out of a previous place. They're there temporarily, they lost housing, there was a hardship. Obviously, when we think about students in transition, students who are homeless, we think of our shelters, and we think of unsheltered families who are living in cars, parks, that sort of thing. We, as a district, last year saw 5,700 children come through our district and qualify for our program last school year. We expect that number to continue to increase this school year. So this program actually doesn't get a whole lot of funding, but we do get some. And so Title I has set aside amount for this program in particular, and we usually have about $80,000 for that. There is a grant through the state that you can apply for. Programs can apply for every 3 years, and that's about $75,000 maximum awarded for each of those 3 years. We have the ESSER grant, so we have some money from the ESSER grant, and this school year is the last year we'll be able to use those funds. We are currently using the funds for things like before and after care, tutoring, additional staff. And then the last piece I included in here because the last 2 years, the state offered a transportation grant for this program in particular. And so we were awarded for the last couple of years some monies for vendor transportation and to help with the stipend. So our program structure, we have in all the schools in the district, there is a program contact. So it's the school social worker in the elementary, middle, alternative, and preschool, and then the SAP counselor or student assistance program counselor in the high schools. They are responsible for making sure that their schools comply with this federal law, and they are responsible for identifying students who are eligible, supporting those students, and removing those barriers. Referrals come to us through a variety of ways. So we have families who self-refer, we have teachers who notice something's not quite right, maybe they get some information from the family or the student, they may refer. It may be that it's an application, online enrollment that indicates it's temporary housing because of a hardship. There are various ways that we do get these referrals. Some referrals come directly to our office and central office. And once we get these referrals, then that's when we bring in the school social worker or the SAP counselor, the liaison for the program. They are responsible for meeting with the family, speaking with the family to kind of figure out what's going on through conversation to see if they would be eligible for these additional services. And if the student is eligible, then what we provide is we provide the ability for that student to stay at the school they're attending when they become displaced, which is called school of origin, school stability. In order to do that, we provide, as a district, transportation to and from the school of origin. If it's a new enrollment and the student is eligible for us, it's an immediate enrollment. And so immediate meaning that we do not require the normal documentation that's required during enrollment. For example, proof of residence, school records even, anything that's going to be a barrier, we do not require it. So once the student's immediately enrolled, however, we want to work with that family to obtain those items. It might be a birth certificate, immunizations, things like that. They're going to need those things eventually. So our school liaisons work with the family and connect them with resources in order to get those pieces that are missing. We provide free meals, and then we provide access to Title I preschool, which I'm really excited about. That's been very successful. As a school social worker and SAP counselor, their role anyway is to connect to community and school resources. They do that exceptionally well. They do that for our students also. We do remove barriers so that students can participate fully in school. So for example, we'll pay for field trips. We have recently started paying for book fairs, and kids love that. We do, as part of the law, have a dispute process, and that is if a family is speaking to a liaison and the liaison doesn't feel like the family qualifies, but the family feels like they do, they have a way of escalating that to us, and there's a whole legal process for that. So we would work with the family, we would talk with them and determine if they qualify or not. If they don't, then it kind of escalates at that point. It goes up to the next level, all the way up to the school board. I'm excited to say, I'm proud to say, that our district really does not have disputes that escalate that far. We only have had maybe a couple, and those were families who had a lease agreement. So they were truly not eligible for our program. So this is the number of kids that we have identified over the last few years. You will notice that last school year, it says 5,143. These are numbers that are reported to the state, and their reporting cutoff is before our school year ends. So that's why when I mentioned earlier we had 5,700 come through our district. We do continue to identify students, obviously, because our school year is year-round. And so these are some numbers. As you can see, we continue to increase. The dip that you notice, that was during the pandemic. Again, I'm very excited to say that our liaisons worked incredibly hard that year to find 4,776 kids during our pandemic when we were remote. So they did a wonderful job with that. We do continue to see our numbers increase. So a little bit about our families. So most of our families are single-parent households. However, we are seeing a huge increase in two-parent households. We are also seeing a big increase in single fathers. Our families are holding down multiple jobs, multiple minimum wage jobs, and typically about 60% or more of our population lives with other people. And what that looks like is they live with, say, grandma for a little bit, and then they may move to an aunt, or then they may move to a friend. Or they could be moving from grandma's house to a hotel for a little bit, then back to grandma's house. But the living with others, that living situation throughout the U.S. is the highest number of living situation that we see among this population. Majority of our families are displaced due to an eviction. We continue to see that. And the barriers that the families have reported to us is that we really lack affordable options within our community to meet that demand. They are unable to pay the deposit and first month's rent typically, or there are wait lists for housing programs that are a pretty lengthy wait list. About our students. So students in our program, they make up about 3.5% of our total population, total school enrollment, I should say. And you can see here we have 347 students that are not school age. So we are required as a district to identify students or kids in our community who are not school age but who are experiencing homelessness. So the way that we do that is we look at the siblings. So siblings in a family, if the student is age 0 to 4, and they are experiencing homelessness or they're in transition, then we do identify them in our program, which is helpful because if they are preschool age, we are able to get them into our preschool classrooms. If they are not yet preschool age, we are able to talk with the family more about what those needs might be for a kid who's age 0 to 3 and connect them with resources in that way. Kindergarten is our highest grade level that we are seeing the most kids who are in transition. 20% receive special education services, and our kids average about 2 school changes within a year, some more than that. And then the average of 25 days absence, that includes excused and unexcused absences, and that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that they're sick, it could be because they're moving around, it could be a number of reasons. Okay. So what we are currently working on is we are currently working to see if we can prioritize our students in this program for transportation. We are looking to expand our McKinney-Vento training. And what that might look like, for an example, is we do have families who are staff, employees, I should say, who may be experiencing homelessness, or they may be supporting families within their own family who are experiencing homelessness. We want to promote gifts to the system process, so I often get asked about donations and can I accept donations to help our children, so we want to definitely do more of that. And we are currently offering tutoring before and after care for our students using the ESSER grant money. We have partnered with the YMCA to also do before and after care and track out and summer programs. So we are looking to find some more funding to continue our tutoring, continue the before and after care, and YMCA does currently offer limited scholarships. The before and after care has been so essential to our families. It has helped save jobs. We are actually using it with transportation so that if transportation can get elementary and middle school siblings on a vehicle together, they have different start times for school, and if they can get the younger student into the before care program, if we can do that, then all the kids can get assigned and get transportation to school. So it's been incredibly helpful. And then, of course, transportation options. We are always looking at the transportation options. So as we look forward, we are looking to increase our school social work positions so that we can have our liaisons in all the schools and helping to support these families. We are looking for a dedicated school social worker. We currently have one now, new for this year, and it has been a blessing. She has been able to really help families who come to us who are not attached to a school, really help them get enrolled immediately, get all the resources, school supplies, all the things that they need to get started. We are looking to have some type of transportation connection, whether that is a person embedded in the department or a dedicated transportation person within our program, to really help us collaborate and communicate with the transportation department for students in this program. Preschool, our preschool school social workers have been just really inundated with a lot of preschool age students who are in this program, who've been identified in this program. And as you know, preschool is so important to our kids. And so they could certainly use some extra help with that. And then, of course, always are continuing to get our program out there, community outreach through hotels, shelters, and just really want to do what we can to support our students. So I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much for providing us with this overview on McKinney-Vento and the importance of our social workers. During my tenure, I had an opportunity to work with some amazing SAP counselors, and they are essentially doing the Lord's work, to ensuring that our families do not fall by the wayside. So, is there any questions? Dr. E?
Yeah, I agree. Some of my favorite people are social workers. And I just wish that the media stayed instead of pulling their mics out at the beginning of this presentation, because I really feel like the whole community needs to know about this and the dire needs that we have in terms of community resources and funding. And then, we're not going to have the ESSER grant funds to continue to support this, while at the same time, the numbers have doubled in 10 years. So, I think we all need to figure out a way to kind of get the word out. And I'm glad that we're, already doing some of the outreach to the community, trying to figure out any other organizations out there or corporate partnerships or churches that could be help to align with them to work on helping these kiddos. So.
Ms. Rice?
So, really thank you a lot, because I'm like Tyler, this definitely is the Lord's work, and I definitely want to bridge that gap with folks in community and faith communities to really understand the significance of the work that you all do, and how they're always saying, how can we help, how can we help? These are ways they can sincerely help families, which directly impacts our students, and it directly impacts student achievement. But my question that I have for you is, because we're talking about student achievement, and you talk about the 4.5 times likely, at what time can they enter into the pre-K program during the year? For instance, you've got a kid that is 4, and say they're 4 right now. Can they enter into the pre-K program right now? I think it would help families in 2 ways. One, we start early impacting that 4.5% times likely, right, to graduate, because they're getting early childhood education, which is extremely important for success. And then 2, it relieves parents of trying to find somewhere for those babies to go so they can go to work or do what they might need to do to sustain the family, to find somewhere for the families to be that night. So I was really, when I was reading the material earlier, that was the one thing that I wanted to make sure I asked and could understand to translate to families. If you have a kid, and I think we start pre-K, is it 3? They can start as early as 3 if it's.
There's some in 3.
For some, okay, so it does start at 3. And they can enter if they identify as Vento at any time throughout the school year.
They can.
I want to make sure I
Yes.
really do understand that, because that is very, very key. And then what would that process, you don't have to tell me that will look like, or at least get back to me what that looks like, of what parents need to do and what they need to provide for the proof of this particular challenge.
So I would definitely recommend, if there are any families who have preschool age children who also have school age children, then I think the first place they can start is at the school age child's school.
Okay.
With the school social worker or even the SAP counselor is a great place to start if they're interested in preschool opportunities. We do have some children that are in the community that are not attached to a school. They don't have a school-age sibling that we identify, and our preschool social workers take that on, and they are amazing.
And let me add too, in terms of what they need to produce to be able to be eligible, we do the assessment, so it's based on housing. One thing that the law does to protect them and also support them is that we don't have to wait on records requests from another location. We don't have to have some of the documents that are required for registration at school. They are there to enroll immediately.
Okay.
And so that's one of the things that is a big support. There shouldn't be any delay in getting
You're
them
gonna make me cry.
into the school. It's a game changer. I'm thinking back, and when we had, for example, we had Katrina. We had people who were displaced from all over different places in the country, and they would come in and we started them in school. That's just one small example, but
Okay.
we have a lot of things that happen where people have to move and they don't have access to these records.
Okay, and so it's definitely for our most vulnerable living in hotels,
Yes.
and then even those who are actually that are unhoused but living with someone, right? Okay, all right. That is great. Thank you so much.
And
Thank
even
you.
our
Great job.
families who don't have a shelter, so who
Okay.
are in cars or in parks or in
Okay.
the woods, we can enroll them. I
Okay.
do want to make sure that's clear. We can enroll them in
Okay.
school.
And we have a very, and I say this because, and I'm very thankful I have not had to experience that, but in a place of empathy, right? Of grasping that our staff is very, I know they are very sensitive and private and all of that great stuff of helping families feel okay, understanding, and where we're not, alerting social services with certain things, even if we are aware of those pieces, we're not. And I'm asking just to make sure, because some families will be very cautious if they're not able to, according to DSS, provide basic needs, which is you can be in a home if your kid doesn't have a bed, but if there's a mat, it still meets state requirements. But if you don't and you're unhoused and you're coming into a school asking to let me register my kid in school at 3 years old, that doesn't start any alerts, does it, with social services of any?
So we would make a CPS report if we had a suspicion of abuse or neglect. When a parent is doing all they can to provide and we feel like they're not neglecting their child, we will work with them as much as possible. In the event that we had to make a report, even if we did that, we work with Child Protective Services to support the family, and we do as much as we can to educate the family about what we're doing to pull in resources to support them. But just because they're in the McKinney-Vento program does not necessarily mean that we're going to make a report to CPS. It's not automatic, and in fact, it's rare that we would do that.
Yes.
Okay.
There would be some other circumstances involved in that
Okay.
Correct.
to
And
indicate.
do we have a measure of what that might look like, or that our social workers are using? And I say that in all sincerity because me being a African American individual and understanding communities and the lens in which people use to determine what they think is abuse or not, right? We really have, and in this society, in which day and time we are, we cannot always assume that everybody understands that, regardless if they are a social worker, because they grew up and came from a different space and place. So I'm always very cautious. You keep hearing me always ask, are we using it in an equity lens? And I think it is good because it refers right back to our strategic plan. Because we have these, sometimes it seems like it's unheard of, like prior to our unfortunate Floyd situation, no one ever really wanted to believe African American people that you get stopped or harassed and you weren't doing anything. And so it's like, no, you had to have been doing something, right? And so I just want to make sure that when we share this, particularly, and I have to say that with my district, there may be a heavier population possibly. And so I want to feel safe in sharing with them, listen, they will work with you. They're there to support you. Don't worry about not having this, and that. It's not an alarm, and some people may not get it, even though we think they got it. So that's just where my heart is. I know you guys get it, but I just...
So let me address that. We do that in a couple of ways.
Okay.
One way is we prefer to have a Master's of Social Work degree versus bachelor's. What that means is you have a higher level of education and experience, first of all, in doing that. Just because you have that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do like what you said, right? So then we do our own training here. It happens when you're hired. We do CPS 101. We have staff who are dedicated to making sure that they understand what does constitute a report for abuse and neglect. And then Michelle is constantly providing training throughout the year about McKinney-Vento awareness, resources, et cetera. We don't just do it when they're hired. We do this, it's required, then every year staff have to do refreshers,
Okay.
whether you've been here 20 years or 2 months.
Okay.
So we're constantly revisiting that with our staff to make sure that there's an awareness of what the law says and what your belief system might be, and then how to proceed from there.
Yes, that's so great to hear, because I love every time when we hear staff at your level share. I will always ask, how is that translating on the ground?
And then our
Right.
staff goes into schools to train
Right.
other staff who are not social workers.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's also important too that that relationship building is there. I know when I was,
That's the key.
it's relationship building. Students come to you when they trust you.
Yep.
And teachers are trained to then report that to the SAP counselors and to whomever, and then they handle it from there. And so they're all trained professionals and are going to do what's best for the students. Ms. Caulfield?
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. This is a very interesting topic for me. The numbers are very disturbing. So I have a lot of good feelings and a lot of really sad feelings that we're talking in such large numbers, but that there are so many things out there for the families and that you guys are doing the work that you're doing. One of my questions is the community engagement piece. So if these families are displaced, how do we get them resources? Some of them may never know. Until you get there, you don't know that question is there to ask, right? So how do we reach them if they are displaced?
So our liaisons work closely with the family to connect them to the resources that we have in our community. Now, we need more resources in our community. And so if a family expresses an interest in shelters, then we will help connect them. If they're interested in more, affordable housing opportunities, we will connect them. So we do, I work very closely with the community, with our Continuum of Care, which is a network of homeless service providers, and with the different agencies, faith community, to help support our families. And we connect to the liaisons to make sure they're aware of what's out there and they're aware of what they can connect the families to. So
It's really a case-by-case basis, though, right? So if you're in a certain community, you want to connect them to the community in which they're staying, I shouldn't say housed, because that's where they're going to be able to feel trusted to that relationship conversation and be able to feel like they can be a part of what needs to happen within the community, within the school. So we want to make sure, and so it would depend specifically on where their students are located, but certainly want to reach out to what's going to best meet that student's need and that family's need.
I guess my thinking was putting myself in their situation, of eviction or fire. Like you're in traumatic mode, right? So you may not know to reach out to your child's school because as a parent, you're like, oh my gosh, I got to keep my job. I have to find some way to pay to feed my kids. Like I would be thinking more like town level or county level. I'm assuming we partner with them to give them like we have these resources come through the school kind of thing. Okay. And then another question I was having is, can you clarify what you said before? There's a lot of numbers that were provided. You spoke about the cutoff, and there was 5,143 students, but then you also mentioned 57,000.
yes, so the state collects data, but they only collect that data up to a certain period. But our schools run past that time. So we are still identifying kids. So that number, 5,143, that was reported to the state does not include the students that were identified from that date to the end of Wake County Public Schools school calendar year. Also, we have students who come in and out of our district. And so the 5,700 number does include students who have come through our district, stayed with us, but then they have left by the end of the year. They may be in Johnston County Schools, for example. And when that happens, Johnston County Schools counts them in their numbers.
So it's 5,700.
It's how many children we had come through our program last year.
Okay. I see that our source of funds, the majority of it is falling in the ESSER grant that we had. So what are we doing with these rising children? Do we have any estimated direction? Where do we expect that I know we're looking for that magic tree, but I'm just, I
I don't know
haven't
that's
found
a
it
magic
yet.
tree. I think that would be great if you find one, though. We would share. If you find that magic tree, we would love to know that.
But I'm saying, like, you know, that was, this has been growing for quite some time, so even before we had the ESSER funds, where were we getting that? Because, I mean, even before COVID, we were at 4,500, a little bit more than that. That's a significant amount. So where did the funds come from back then?
So we get them. So we have funds in that slide earlier that articulates from Title I, right? There's also I can't remember the other funding sources.
A state grant.
A state grant
Comes
that we
out
use.
every 3 years.
We're also looking internally to a large degree, and I'll speak also about social workers specifically, but we're looking internally at some of our own systems and structures. What can we do that will allow the ability for example, in our before and after school care programs that are not necessarily Y-based, can we do some things with some scholarships to provide opportunities for students in the future years? And so we're trying to offset some of those costs with our own internal structures, and we're problem solving that right now. This is going to be an ongoing process, though, there's no doubt. And again, it is also based on what it is that the student needs. So if you're in a high school and there's a field trip, right, is there a funding source through that high school that the high school may have that allows for a student that might be under McKinney-Vento to attend the field trip? So it's a variety of ways to think about how we can offset those costs, but we are definitely looking at internal structures to think about that. I can say we did have a business case move forward thinking about social workers specifically at the high school level, but we know we need to start moving some of this work forward as we're articulating the needs of our students in our community going forward, thinking about more staff that will help support this work and reach out to those families.
And do you have any idea of the total amount that we have spent per year on McKinney-Vento?
I think we'll have to get that for you. We'll have to gather that data.
That would be great. What do we do with the counselors as far as when these children, because it is very traumatic, you know, for the families and the children. What do we do with the counselors? Is it like mandatory that once we know they're McKinney-Vento, we just kind of pull them in? Because these kids are like traumatized. You know, they're not necessarily, I just saw some kind of special on how we label a lot of the children. We say that they're resilient. And sometimes they're not as resilient as it looks different. Like when we're adults are having trauma and difficulty, we see the depression, we see it come out in different ways, anger even. But with children, sometimes it's through their coloring, sometimes it's through other, just different examples they were saying. So now I'm remembering seeing that and picturing all these poor children. But they may not come to us for help. They may not go to their guidance counselor. So do we do anything where we pull them in aside just to say, hey, how's it going?
So one thing about this program, it is confidential. And so we don't share a list of kids or anything like that. But what we do as liaisons is we are aware that it is very traumatic for a kid to be going through this. If there are opportunities for the student to connect with the counselor, that can happen, but the liaison can facilitate that and make that happen, that connection, without sharing a lot of information about, you know, the student's McKinney-Vento program, the student lost their house last night, mom got into a fight with, you know, they don't share all of those details, but they may say, you know, this child could really use some extra support and connect them that way. We also do, as liaisons, mental health connections within the community and within our system as well, if needed. So there are ways of connecting those children to supports within the school and outside the school without sharing a lot of personal information.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I have two more quick things. Requests, I guess, more. We did say, like I think Wing Dr. Ng brought up a really great point that it would have been nice if we had media here to capture those. So perhaps we could, I know we can count on Kern Huey to put it in his tweets. Maybe we can send the slides to all of the media to put it out there. I think it's important for our community to see those numbers. I mean, it just really hits you in the gut. You know it's a problem. We all know it's a problem. And, regardless of whether you think our economy is doing well or not, and that's as far as I'll go on that, to see these numbers and the displaced housing, that's disturbing. And I don't think people are realizing how many people are struggling with this. That's a lot. It's a lot. So I think our community should know that, and maybe we could share some of those slides with them. And then my last ask is, can we, understanding some of this information and the way you broke it down, are we able to get some kind of demographics on the children that are in these programs? The age groups, concentrations of where it is, places that, just so we can understand, where most of our families are struggling?
You mean in geographically?
All of it, these are kids in our western region, our eastern region. This is boys, this is girls, this is the age group, race, whatever it is. Just so we get a better understanding of concentration and we know where our resources need to be. I mean, if we have a large amount in our elementary school areas or in the western side, we know that we need to put programs and more community engagement in those areas to try and get some more help, but just to understand. I mean, the numbers here are just, it's a lot.
It's on slide 9.
So, I did see that it's like percentages, but.
Yeah. Well, it says 30, it's numbers, it's like 3,200 elementary students.
And I just saw Chief Ells was saying that they will.
Yeah, we will be able to do that. We can get that.
Similar to the exclusion and restraint, deeper dive into a deeper breakdown.
Yeah,
more
it just
data
gives
that
you a
they
very
can
clear
disseminate.
picture of what you're looking at.
Yep.
And we use that as one data point amongst many when we're assigning our social workers to schools. Like, we have this one serving one school, this one has 2 schools, and that's decided upon based on our McKinney-Vento numbers and many other data points. So we can tell you this school had this many students, this grade level, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think it answers a lot of questions for families as well, too, once they see, what's going on in their school or their area, and hopefully we'll get, some more community jumping in and knowing where to jump in. We just had, in my board advisory on Monday, everybody kind of had the same thing to say about the subject matter that we were talking about, but where they go and get the information was really the most common factor, is they needed to know where to go get it. So I just think that helps. Thank you.
Dr. Ng and then Mr. Vice Chair Johnson-Hoslet.
I was just also thinking about, what are the success stories coming out of it. I think that's also important to note in our statistics. And also that's important to provide that to our community partners. If they're going to partner with us in helping these folks out, they want to make sure that they're getting results, right? So I think that's an important piece of it too. And also our elected officials need to know about this and the success stories. So.
Thank you so much. There's so many things I could say, and I assure you many of these groups know these numbers, especially because many of these children, some of these children in those numbers also have to stay at DSS because there is nowhere to house them. I want to articulate we are not the only group who are trying to express the impact of housing affordability and lack of affordable housing, which are 2 very different things that directly impact our students and our families. And of course, I would say thank you for sharing this, especially for those who are seeing this for the first time. I would certainly say during COVID, knowing the numbers is still not the same. So while I wish the media was here, the truth is not until you are literally on New Bern Avenue. And during COVID, we were delivering those meals for hotel after hotel. So trust me, the numbers don't do the real impact of seeing how communities and families are living. which I don't even have to go into the work that we work on around, if they're in a hotel, they're actually never going to get a nutritious meal because there is no real way to actually cook and eat food. So everything they're eating is also unhealthy. So the list could go on. But I guess one of the questions that I'm curious about, and this is not really, I think, for our seasoned people, educators and social workers alike, and Ms. Rice hit on it very well, and I always say this more frequently in student assignment appeals, because families don't often want to disclose they're unhoused because of the domino effect of what this means. And essentially, DSS also has them unhoused in their literal building. But families don't disclose that. So they're asking us for a lot of things that we are saying no to because we don't actually know what is precipitated for them to be asking us for student reassignment. So I guess my question is, and I don't know that you have an answer, but it's one of the things that I'm struggling with because I just had somebody reach out to me about a student who had been out of school for 2 weeks, and it finally took one teacher to ask, and she had been unhoused, and her family didn't know how to get her to school. No teacher, nobody, for 2 weeks. This is a high school senior who had never been in trouble, grades are great, all of a sudden not at school. 10 days, nobody asked. One teacher said, "You've been out, you're behind, how do I help you get ready for your test?" And she didn't respond. Called the father, and the father said, "I don't really want to disclose this, but I don't want to mess up her grades. We've been unhoused for a month, and we don't have a way to get her to school. We did before, now we don't have a car." So for 2 weeks, they were able to figure it out. They don't know these resources are here. And I guess at the end of the day, in addition to not wanting the dominoes to start falling of getting their children taken, because that's, like it or not, that's what people immediately go to, is the legal ramifications of having young children unhoused. But I guess the second piece of that for me is I don't know the answer. I don't know how we don't ensure that a kid has been unhoused for a month, missing 10 days of school, who did not have a track record of chronic absences, and no one picked up the phone to call the parent. And now she's 2 weeks behind as a senior. I mean, I don't know how we trigger something like that, but it is alarming to me because, of course, the teacher's concern is, what if this impacts this kid who had the ability to go to college, but now her whole trajectory has been thrown off because she's behind and overwhelmed in all of the other mental health issues that come with having kept this secret because the stigma and shame still attached to it.
They don't know where to go. Like you just said, they don't know where to go.
So I'm not sure how we address that, but it's always been a concern, but again, this one was really hard.
Or even when you think about our attendance policy and you look at some of the structures for notifications in there, that doesn't necessarily have the same effect when written communications might be going home about a series of successive absences,
Exactly.
3, 6, 9, et cetera.
Or the phone. Well, the phone worked. That's the sad part. When the teacher called, the dad answered the phone.
Oh, right.
So for me, I'm like, well, clearly nobody's called him because.
It goes back to knowledge and awareness of our students, both at the classroom level and at the school level.
Yeah.
And we ought to be able to identify when a student who is not normally absent is out for more than a few days. There's some kind of.
Yeah, and I told,
there.
I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things, when Ms. Caulfield's asking, I was like, well, we have an answer of how to address the gaps and what you've been doing in the gaps before ESSER. I mean, there are not enough people in our system to handle this. So I'm clear on that, and it's important to articulate that the social workers that we do have doing it have multiple students and multiple caseloads that they would not have in private practice outside of our schools. So I certainly want to acknowledge that the capacity isn't there. And so I guess I'm literally like, well, are there red flag triggers, even for educators, right? Like the teachers in the classroom, so that the onus isn't, again, I don't expect if you have chronic absences that that's necessarily a trigger. But I'm curious, do we educate our new people when they're coming on, right? Like new teachers in the classroom to start paying attention to, because they're already overwhelmed. So let me be clear. I had a stay-at-home mom who's been very great. I asked her to come back to school, come back to the classroom, and she texted me and was like, I can't do this. Like, there are too many changes. I'd rather go work at Target. That's literally what she said to me. But so I don't be overwhelmed when they first start. But I guess I'm just curious about, like, we give teachers so many information, so much resources. We're not even talking curriculum. We're talking all the other things we require them to do in the classroom. But this is an educator who felt horrible
Yeah, I mean, what
that
you're
they missed
talking
the mark.
about is relationship.
It
right?
is.
And we're going to keep talking about that.
And I'm always
It
gonna
is
say
the
relationship matters.
is first, and it is what facilitates the instructional model that's going to be effective in that classroom. It also is
I'm
going
also going to
to...
support my educators that they are underwater. And so
Correct.
it is impossible to have the relationship with everyone. So
Agreed.
this isn't for you all to answer. It is the place for me to acknowledge that we just don't have the capacity in our current infrastructure to address something that, if you had capacity, this would have easily been caught. No chronic absences, great grades, someone would have immediately been clicked, but just the fact that our system is so overwhelmed that people are going to miss it. But relationships matter, but also, I will lastly say, their health and wellness of those people who work in our buildings is too, and this isn't to make them feel bad, because they are swamped.
Oh, they're doing everything they can every day.
And in addition to,
So add that to your business case. That someone will fund, maybe not the people who are required to figure that out, but someone.
and in addition to, just thinking teachers, we also have to include our receptionists, our janitors, our child nutrition services, because those too are folks that build relationships and that may
Absolutely.
be willing to engage with kids that may not feel comfortable talking to a teacher or may not see their counselor that often. So it's that whole school approach. No person can do this work alone, and I think that we have to start recentering that mind shift to make sure that we are giving everybody in the building the tools that they need. And it goes back to having a smiling face at the front door when you check in. If they have built that relationship with that receptionist, they're more likely to talk to that receptionist about what's happening than a teacher. So we have to make sure that we're empowering those receptionists to know the information and where to drive that information to connect those dots. Because I've said this many times, and I'll keep saying that this is a huge system. And folks get lost in this system with trying to figure out how to advocate for their child. And so I think the discussion is really great. And it's not to Ms. Johnson-House's point, not to put blame on teachers, because teachers are burnt out. I'm living proof of that. That's why I love, because I was burnt out. And things have changed, but that passion is still there. And I don't think you have to be in the classroom to just to not to advocate for our needs. And folks are doing that work however they see fit. So I just think including those additional bodies would be helpful. And I guess Ms. Rice, you will close us out.
Okay, 60 seconds is all I need. What about, what are we doing around our nonverbal practices? Meaning, are there signs in the school that reassure students that if they are experiencing this, and saying things like safe space, confidential, so that they know how to do it. I had a student today sent me an email about what a teacher said to them and basically was like, are you my board member? Can you help me? And they said this to me, and they left it just like that. So that's powerful, right? That the student may not have been able, what are our nonverbal welcoming communications that we're doing that they don't have to say anything, they don't have to feel bad, but they see the signs of support, right? I'm a mental health first aid trainer, so it's all about signs and symptoms, right? They see the signs of where they can get help, and they don't have to say anything to anybody, and it's something simple where they can text or say, this is where you go to, stuff like that.
So funny that you bring that up. We are just about to put some posters out in schools.
Yay.
The way they got developed is we used Alliance Health, our communications department, and we have our new youth mental health advisory group that started this year, made up of all high school students.
Yes.
One of the posters is developed by a high school student, and they're very simple. And they say things like, it's okay to feel your feelings.
Yep.
It has a picture of two children. We have them developed, for elementary, middle, and high. And it says on there, want to talk about your feelings? You can visit Mr. and Miss So-and-so in this office.
Yeah.
It has the 988 number as well. So students who have phones can text or chat with that hotline.
Sure can.
So those are going to be coming out in the next month or two, where they're going to the printer soon, and then they're going to be sent out to every single school.
In reference to this as well. Is that what we're saying?
It's very broad, so it's going to be that you could talk about anything basically you want. It's
Okay.
more from a mental health angle.
Yeah.
But we know that many of our MV students are experiencing, like we talked about, trauma and mental health issues. So those are going to be up, and we're putting them in places that are, it's going to be even on bathroom stalls, not just in the
Yes.
hallways, but
Very good.
private places,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah.
Kudos.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I love having the students involved in that because there's no better way to reach them than to ask them to be the voice.
Yeah, and they gave us great feedback, because we had them designed, and they're like, if you put this in a high school, we're going to
Yeah.
laugh at this.
I hear that all the time, Mom.
Students always
That's not
have
how
to
you
be
do it. I'm
That's
like,
right.
okay, tell me how.
So, yeah, it was a great process.
Yeah, we want to see them.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get them out. You'll see them soon.
Well, just closing out, a thank you for all the work on this.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that everybody on the board values this work a lot. This is a problem we've seen. These are families that oftentimes don't have strong advocacy, right? They oftentimes don't know the resources that are available to them. And it's a problem that a lot of people in society don't see, right? We often hear about the unhoused being invisible. And so just your work to really ramp up engagement and get these resources out to as many people as possible. Again, whether it was sending it directly to the press who left early for the meeting or whatever strategies, we really appreciate everything you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next meeting is March 13th.
2 weeks.
Yes.
2 weeks from now. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, they say sometimes, Lisa has always said, bang it, so they know, but I don't know that they can hear it in here.
All right, well,
But maybe they'll visually see that.
all right, well, we are officially adjourned.
All right, thank you.
Y'all missed an amazing meeting.